Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today we are going to talk about the composition of periodontal ligament, as we have been talking about periodontal ligament for the last two lectures. This lecture is also a continuation of the periodontal ligament. In the last lecture we talked about the extracellular composition of the periodontal ligament. Extracellular composition compartment of the periodontal ligament consists of the ground substance, in which various fibers, the collagen fibers, oxytocin, reticulin and elastin fibers are embedded. We talked about the types of the collagen fibers present in the periodontal ligament, their types in detail. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about the rest of the three types of fibers present within the periodontal ligament, consisting of the oxytocin, the reticulin and the elastin fibers. So moving on to these three elastic fibers that are present within the periodontal ligament other than the collagen fibers. The collagen fibers were basically making up the principal group of fibers that were divided into 5 major groups. And then we had a gingival ligament system that was actually present in the gingival system, but it was supporting the health of the periodontium. So coming to the elastic fibers, basically there are 3 types of elastic fibers present within the periodontal ligament. And these are the elastin fibers, the oxytocin fibers and the elastin fibers. These 3 types of fibers, the elastin, oxytocin and the elastin fibers, are elastic in nature, and that is why they are classified into the elastic fibers. Of these, the oxytocin fibers are present within the periodontal ligament, whereas the elastin fibers are most often found within the gingival ligament fibers. Oxytocin fibers are also called the pre-elastin fibers. These fibers are basically microfibrils. They are made up of the bundles of microfibrils extensively distributed within the periodontal ligament. Within the periodontal ligament, they are attached to cementum on one side, and from there they course into, or they extend into, the periodontal ligament in various directions, mostly horizontal, but they never or rarely incorporate into the bone, alveolar bone, on the opposite side. So these oxytocin fibers, they are microfibril bundles that extend from the cementum into the PDL in various directions, but they do not incorporate into the bone on the opposite side. In the cervical region, they are numerous and they follow the course of the gingival ligament fibers and the transeptal ligament fibers. Within the periodontal ligament proper, these oxytocin fiber bundles are longitudinally oriented to the root surface, and they cross the oblique fiber bundles in perpendicular direction. Obviously, the oblique fiber bundles are present horizontally, so the oxytocin fibers, as they are present longitudinally, तो दोनों का relationship perpendicular हो जाता है. Oxytocin fibers within the periodontal ligament terminate in relation to the vessels and the nerves. And because these are elastic in nature, they have the tendency to contract under the tensional forces on the PDL. So as they terminate in relation to the vessels and the nerves, they function in regulating the vascular flow in relation to the tooth function in those vessels, and they also respond to the tensional forces on the PDL. Because they are elastic in nature, they can contract or expand when the pressure is put on the PDL. They respond to the tensional forces on the PDL. As you can see here in this figure, let me get a pointer or a highlighter. Let's get a highlighter. This figure here shows the bone on one side and the cementum on the other side. These oxytalin fibers basically, and then you have the ligament in between. These oxytalin fibers, they originate from the cementum on one side and they extend into various directions within the periodontal ligament, but they never incorporate onto the bone in the opposite side. And then these fibers are more numerous in the cervical region, and there they follow the course of the gingival and the transeptal ligaments, where within the PDL proper in this region, let me get the highlighter again, within the PDL proper they follow the course of the, this is the course of the horizontal the oblique fibers, and these oxytalin fibers, they follow this course perpendicular to them. Okay, so in this figure you can clearly see the oxytalin fibers embedded into the cementum on one side. This is your cementum where the oxytalin fibers are embedded into it, and then they span into the periodontal ligament, and within the periodontal ligament proper they are present in relation to the vessels and the nerves. These six that I'm highlighting, these are vessels and the nerves. They're present closer to the vessels and the nerves because these oxytalin fibers, as they're elastic in nature, they respond to the tensional forces, and they're present close to the nerves and the vessels, so they help regulate the vascular flow in relation to the function of the tooth. That was all about the oxytalin fibers. Then we have the reticular fibers, which are also elastic in nature. These reticular fibers are basically immature collagen fibers, and they are related. They are present in relation to the basement membrane of the blood vessels within the periodontal ligament, and in relation to the epithelial cells within the periodontal ligament. So the reticular fibers are immature collagen fibers which are present in relation to the basement membrane of the blood vessels and epithelial cells of the periodontal ligament. So this is all about the fiber system of the periodontal ligament. We had the various types of collagen fibrils, then we have had the elastic fibrils, of which the oxytalin is numerous in PDL, and then we have the reticular, which are less numerous within the PDL ligament. Then we have the ground substance into which the cellular community and the fibrous ligaments of the periodontal ligament are embedded. This is called the ground substance. The ground substance is basically an amorphous background material that binds the tissues and the fluids together, and basically this substance serves for the diffusion of gases and metabolites within the periodontal ligament. By composition, this ground substance is 70% water, and this water basically gives the ground substance the ability to withstand the stresses put on the periodontal ligament. So this basically water component of the ground substance is giving the periodontal ligament the ability to withstand the stresses put on it. Other than water, there are other non-collagenous matrix proteins present in the ground substance, consisting of glycoproteins, fibronectin, tenasins, proteoglycans, and dermatan sulfate type GAGs. This is all about the ground substance. Major काम ground substance का क्या है? Binding the tissues and the fluids together and to serve as the diffusion of gases, as a medium for the diffusion of gases and metabolites. This figure here shows the PDL that has been in function and the PDL that has not been properly functioning, or that has been non-functional for about 6 months. If you can appreciate in the functional PDL an excessive amount of bone and a functional periodontal ligament, a thick periodontal ligament here, and the non-functional tissue whereas has less amount of bone, and so is the periodontal ligament squeezed within it. So the active tooth has more functional and healthy periodontal ligament. Other than the cells and fibers embedded within the ground substance of the periodontal ligament, we have certain other structures that are present in the connective tissue of the periodontal ligament, and they are the blood vessels, the nerves, the lymphatic supply of the periodontal ligament, and the cementicles. And now we are going to individually talk about these vessels, nerves, lymph vessels, and the cementicles. Blood supply, or the blood vessels present in the periodontal ligament, the major blood supply of the periodontal ligament is coming from the inferior alveolar arteries for the mandible and superior alveolar arteries for the maxillary teeth. Whereas minor branches of the arteries are coming from the gingiva in the form of lingual and the palatine arteries. And the vessels within that reach the PDL are coming from various sources. Majority of the vessels that are coming within the PDL, they are the branches from the apical vessels that supply the dental pulp. So the vessels that supply the dental pulp, they branch into the periodontal ligament. Other than that, we have branches from numerous perforating arteries. If you remember, these perforating arteries are basically the vessels that are present within the alveolar bone. So they are called the intra-alveolar vessels. These intra-alveolar vessels, or the perforating arteries, they perforate the alveolar bone through the cribriform plate and enter into the periodontal ligament. So we have those perforating arteries coming into the periodontal ligament from the alveolar bone. These perforating arteries are more numerous in the periodontal ligament of posterior teeth as compared to the anterior teeth, and they're more numerous in the mandibular teeth as compared to the maxillary teeth. Within this periodontal ligament, these perforating arteries, they run in a horizontal direction, penetrating the alveolar bone and then entering into the PDL of the next tooth. So this is how the vessels of the PDL are coming into the periodontal ligament from various sources. Then we have certain branches from gingival vessels entering into the periodontal ligament, as I just said, the lingual and the palatine arteries. These enter the ligament from the coronal direction, not the apical direction, the coronal direction. The major periodontal ligament vessels lie between the principal fiber bundles close to the alveolus wall. So near the socket lining, we have numerous periodontal ligament vessels that are lying between the principal fibers of the periodontal ligament. So the major sources of the vessels for the periodontal ligament is three. One, from the apical vessels that supply the dental pulp, the superior and the inferior alveolar arteries respectively for the mandible and the maxilla. The branches that are coming from within the alveolus, the perforating arteries that run horizontally and penetrate into the alveolar bone and then enter into the PDL. They are more numerous in posterior teeth and the mandibular teeth. And then the gingival vessels that are entering the ligament from the coronal direction. So these three sources of vessels supply the PDL with its blood supply. All of these blood vessels within the PDL are present close to the socket wall and between the periodontal principal fiber bundles. This PDL vasculature has special features. These vessels of the PDL, basically, they form a plexus of capillary loops. This plexus of capillary loops is called a clavicular plexus, and within this plexus there are a number of large fenestrations or gaps within the lining of the capillaries. So the capillaries that form this clavicular plexus has those capillary walls has loads of fenestrations, and the clavicular plexus of the capillary loops, this plexus that we are talking about, it completely encircles the tooth within the connective tissue right beneath the gingival crevice and in the apical part of the ligament. These fenestrations within the capillaries basically are related to the high metabolic requirement of the tissue. And as we know that because the PDL has a high metabolic requirement and it has a high turnover rate, so the PDL is supplied, is generously supplied with the vessels as compared to any other connective tissue in the body. It has a lot of vascular supply because it has high metabolic requirements, and because of that high metabolic requirement, the capillaries within the crevicular plexus of the capillary loop of the PDL, the capillaries within that capillary loop has loads of fenestrations, and the number of fenestrations or gaps within the lining of the capillary relates to the stage of eruption of the tooth. So this is all about the blood supply of the periodontal ligament. The blood supply of the periodontal ligament is coming from three sources: the perforating arteries, the gingival vessels, and the apical vessels supplying the dental pulp, the inferior and the superior alveolar arteries. All of these three sources of vessels, they are numerous on the side of the alveolar socket of the PDL, and they are present between the principal fiber bundles, and this vasculature basically forms a plexus of capillary loop within the connective tissue of the tooth, completely encircling the tooth right beneath the gingival crevice region. And within this plexus, the capillary wall has lots of fenestrations, and the number of fenestration relates to the stage of eruption, and the capillaries have lots of fenestrations. That property is related to the high metabolic requirement of the tissue. Then we have the venous drainage of the venous supply of the periodontal ligament. This drainage is achieved basically by axially directed vessels that drain into a system of network in the apical portion of the ligament, consisting of large diameter venules. So the venous system of the periodontal ligament consists of large diameter venules that drain into a system of network in the apical portion of the ligament. The veins within the PDL do not usually accompany the arteries. Instead, they pass through the alveolar walls into the intra-alveolar venous networks where they drain, and anastomosis with the veins within the gingiva also occurs when they penetrate into the alveolus walls. A dense venous network is particularly important around the apex of the alveolus. So around the apical region of the socket, a dense network is present. As I said, that the system of the veins within the periodontal ligament drains into a network which is present in the apical portion of the ligament. So we have a dense network of venous drainage system, or venules you could say, in more prominent in the apical region of the alveolus. And within the periodontal ligament, AV anastomosis is also present. So this is all about the venous drainage, and the lymphatic drainage follows the lymph vessels. They follow the venous drainage within the periodontal ligament. So this is all about the blood supply, or the blood vessels, venous supply, or the venules present within the PDL, and the lymph vessels present within the periodontal ligament. The next and the most important thing present within the PDL connective tissue is the nerve supply of the periodontal ligament. We have a system of nerves present within the periodontal ligament, which obviously give the periodontal ligament its sensory function. The periodontal ligament has actually two types of nerve fibers: sensory fibers and autonomic fibers. The sensory fibers of the periodontal ligament give it the function of nociception, which is the reception of pain, and mechanoreception, which is the sensation of touch and pressure. And the second type of fibers present within the periodontal ligament are the autonomic sympathetic fibers that are associated with the vessels of the PDL that basically affect the regional blood flow of the PDL vessels. So we have sensory supply of the periodontal ligament, and we have the autonomic sympathetic fibers supplying the periodontal ligament. All the innervations of the PDL, basically all the nerves of the PDL, are mediated by the dental branches of the alveolar nerves, which enter the periodontal ligament through the apical perforations of the tooth socket, and they are joined by the perforating branches of the interalveolar nerves that cross the bone and enter into the periodontal ligament. All of the nerve fibers are either large diameter myelinated sensory fibers, or they are small diameter unmyelinated sensory or autonomic fibers. So if here in this figure, let me get a pointer. This is your dental pulp. This region is your dental pulp. The nerve supply of the periodontal ligament basically is entering the periodontal ligament through the apex of the socket. You have branches entering into the periodontal ligament through the apical region of the socket, and these branches, they go from apical direction towards the gingival margin in this direction, and meanwhile they are joined by these perforating nerves from within the alveolar bone. These perforating nerves that are entering into the PDL from within the alveolar bone could follow two directions. They could go in the apical direction, or they could go in the gingival direction. ये दो directions हो सकती हैं इसकी. So basically this is what I was just talking about. All the innervations of the PDL are mediated by the dental branches of the alveolar nerves, जो कि PDL में tooth socket के apical perforation से या apex से enter करती हैं, and they move from the apical direction towards the gingival margin, ऊपर की तरफ जाती हैं, and perforating branches that enter from the alveolus into the periodontal ligament. ये दो तरह की हमारे पास innervation, ये दो तरह की directions follow करती हैं हमारी सारी PDL की innervations. And then we have two types, sensory fibers and autonomic sympathetic fibers. There are generally three patterns that the innervation of the periodontal ligament follows. The nerve fibers run from the apical direction towards the gingival margin, and they are joined by the laterally entering nerves through the foramen of the socket. These laterally entering nerves, as I just said, could follow two directions. They could branch into fibers that extend apically, or they could give branches that extend gingivally, जैसे कि मैंने अभी बताया. Let me draw it again. Sorry. Okay. So we have fibers, nerve fibers coming from the apex of the tooth and entering into the periodontal ligament and moving from this apical direction towards the gingival margin. Then we have the lateral perforating nerves that are entering into the periodontal ligament from the alveolar bone. These branches could follow this direction, which is apical, or they could go in the coronal or gingival direction, this. So these are the two routes that these nerve fibers could follow. Then these nerve fibers basically have regional variations. They terminate within the PDL in relation to the neural elements. Apical region contains more nerve endings than elsewhere. So when these nerve fibers basically extending from the apical region going into the gingival direction, in this course that they follow, during this course that they follow, they could terminate in various directions, various regions, and the terminations that occur from these nerves is basically more dense in the apical region of the periodontal ligament. So these are the regional termination variations that could occur within the nerves of the periodontal ligament. Then we have the terminations of these nerve endings. These nerve endings could terminate in different manners within the periodontal ligament. They could either terminate as free nerve endings, or they could terminate forming a roughness corpuscle. They could terminate in a coil form ending, or they could terminate in spindle-like endings surrounded by the fibrous capsules. So we have three patterns the periodontal ligament innervations could follow. The first type is the major pattern of the nerves. The nerves basically enter into the periodontal ligament from the apex of the tooth, and from there they go up towards the gingival margin. These group of nerves is joined by the another group of nerves that is coming from the socket. The nerves that are coming from the socket into the into the periodontal ligament, these nerves could extend gingivally or they could extend apically. Then during the course that these nerves follow, they could terminate in various regions along the periodontal ligament. Most of the terminations that the nerve endings most of the terminations of these nerve endings are present within the apical region of the periodontal ligament. Then these nerve endings or these nerves could terminate as various forms. They could either terminate as free nerve endings or Ruffini's corpuscle, or they could form a coil form ending, or they could form a spindle-like ending. So we have four types of neural terminations seen in the periodontal ligament nerves: the free nerve ending, the Ruffini's corpuscle, the coil form, and the fourth is the spindle-like endings surrounded by the capsule. Free nerve endings basically are tree-like configurations, as you can see here in this figure. Let me use a highlighter here. These basically are the free nerve endings where you can appreciate tree-like configuration of the nerve endings. This nerve is terminated in a tree-like fashion. This is called the free nerve ending of the nerve. This is the most numerous type of termination of the nerves of the periodontal ligament, and this could be located along the entire length of the periodontal ligament, and we say that it is located along the entire length of the root at regular intervals. This type of nerve termination has a function of detecting pain called the nociception and detecting touch and pressure on the periodontal ligament, which is called the mechanoreception. Then we have the second type of termination called the Ruffini's corpuscle, where the nerve terminates in a dendritic fashion. It has lots of dendrites, and the end of the dendrite is swollen. As you can see here, the end of the dendrite is swollen, or we say that it has a terminal expansion. These terminal expansions are called the Ruffini's corpuscles. They could be single or they could be compound. This type of termination is present only at the apex of the root, and it functions in mechanoreception. Then we have the spindle-like the coil form endings, where here you can see the coil form ending where the nerve terminates in a coiled fashion. This type is present. This is the coiled termination that you can appreciate. This is mostly present in the mid-root region of the periodontal ligament, and it has no known function. Then the fourth type is the spindle-like ending surrounded by a fibrous capsule, which is present at the apex of the root. It is the least abundant type of termination, and it has no known function. As you can see here, this nerve ending is terminating into a capsule. This capsule basically is the spindle-like ending, which is surrounded by the capsule. It is mostly present at the apex of the root. This figure, these figures and this table is a very important UQ. Most often, the question that you get from the periodontal ligament, the questions that you could get from the periodontal ligament are drawing the section of the tooth showing the gingival ligament fibers, drawing a section of the tooth showing the principal fiber bundles, then what are the four types of neural terminations seen in the periodontal ligament, what are their location and functions. So this table would help you a lot answering that question. So we have four types of nerve terminations present within the periodontal ligament: the free nerve endings present along the entire root length that function in nociception and mechanoception, then the Ruffini's corpuscles present at the apex, function in mechanoception, then the coil form present in the mid-root region, no known function, then the spindle-like endings at the root apex without any known function. This was all about the nerve terminations or the nerve bundles of the periodontal ligament. We've talked about the blood supply of the periodontal ligament. We've talked about the nerve supply, the venous drainage system, the lymphatic system, and the nerve supply of the periodontal ligament. The fourth and the last thing that is present, that could be present within the connective tissue of the periodontal ligament, is the calcified bodies called the cementicles. Cementicles are sometimes found within the periodontal ligament, and they're more common in older individuals. These bodies are basically calcified structures, and they most commonly are free within the connective tissue of the periodontal ligament, or sometimes they could fuse together into large masses of calcified structures. They could also sometimes join the cementum, and in that case, when they join the cementum, as the age advances, when the cementum thickens, they could incorporate into the cementum, and in that case they form the X-cementosis on the surface of cementum. The origin of these calcified bodies is not established. It is possible that the degenerated epithelial cells within the periodontal ligament could form the basis of the calcification. So these structures basically are the calcified bodies. As you can see here in this figure, this dark purple calcified round body is a cementicle, which is present in the soft connective tissue of the periodontal ligament. It could be possible that a degenerated epithelial cell within the periodontal ligament could form the basis for the initiation of this sort of calcification. These bodies could swim freely within the soft connective tissue of the periodontal ligament, or they could get attached with the cementum wall. When they get attached with the cementum wall, the cementum, as it thickens, it may envelop these bodies within its structure, and in that case they form the X-cementosis within the cementum. X-cementosis. Okay? This is all about today's lecture. I am going to see you guys tomorrow. Not tomorrow, on Monday, inshallah. The question and answer for this lecture would be at 11:30 tomorrow.